once again to the Blueprints. This is Canada's Conservative Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock, with new content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We do appreciate you joining us here today. As always, please like, comment, subscribe, share this program. Together we can push back against that ever-moving Liberal agenda. Tell your friends about it, that you can download it and listen to it at your convenience on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, you name it, it is out there. We have today a very important topic. I think it's something everybody, no matter where you live, no matter what you do, you're talking about it. That's the high price of energy. It is absolutely through the roof. Some parts of the country are over $2 a liter for regular, $2.30 for a liter of diesel, which is affecting the price all through the board. And talk about that, the expert on the topic, we have Shannon Stubbs, the Member of Parliament for Lakeland. She's also the Shadow Minister for Rural Economic Development. Welcome, Shannon.
Thanks, Jamie. It's always nice to be here with you. And I don't know about an expert, but I am a rural person who's very familiar with hiking costs and being and all the people who are hardly able to keep up.
Absolutely. So let's, before we get to the NDP motion that we debated last week, that is absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk about the gas price? What is causing this? We have a war in Ukraine, Russia, but at the end of the day, why are we experiencing these high gas prices when we have oil reserves right here in Canada?
Yeah, exactly. That's the main thing that Canadians should be asking. So I think this is obviously a combination of global factors and fluctuations pushing up the prices here. But of course, the carbon tax unnecessarily hikes the costs every time any Canadian anywhere goes to fill up their tanks. And the real key part, I think, is the issue that you've alluded to. It just makes no sense whatsoever, being a country with the third largest oil reserves in the world, with the fifth largest natural gas reserves in the world, but no self-sufficiency, no cross-country infrastructure, which forces refineries on the East Coast to import from the U.S., actually, can you imagine this? I don't know why, but importing from our neighbor with fewer resources than us, as the top country that we export. And then, of course, after that, a whole bunch of countries that don't even come close to Canada's environmental responsibility or labor standards, and never mind all of the environmental standards, world-leading environmental standards that Canadian producers adhere to in Canada, which, by the way, is also a better track record than the U.S., but certainly not to mention the OPEC countries.
Absolutely. So COVID hit, the world demand for gasoline went down. As we kind of recovered through this, the demand went up.
Yeah.
We have a conflict in the Ukraine, which we mentioned before. So we have an increasing supply, but demand has the increased demand, but supply is starting to take a bit of a hit because of that disruption. But at the same time, we have an industry in Canada that's been trying for as long as I can remember, try to expand and supply and disrupt not only the dictator oil, but also allow their technology innovation within the domestic supply to rise and shine and show that we do have labor standards that are top-notch. We do have environmental standards and start producing the energy that the world needs. In Asia, in Europe, we could have been ready. We could have increased capacity, but right now we have handcuffed ourselves, so we can't even offset some of this disruption.
Totally. And it is mind-boggling. It is really a travesty, and I think if the kind of damage that has happened because of government in the energy sector, either with a different government in place or in any other country in the world, it would be considered an economic catastrophe. But instead, the Liberal and anti-energy left encourage exactly this through their policy positions and obviously also through their advocacy. It is like, to put this in perspective, there are up to 22, I think, major multi-billion-dollar energy projects in all different areas of the sector that have been canceled or stalled under these Liberals since 2015. A real travesty for those proponents of reducing emissions and making real concrete contributions to environmental stewardship, which, of course, Canada is already the best
Absolutely.
In the world, but internationally would have been the opportunity for LNG export from Canada, from all of our coasts. Jamie, 18 projects, potential LNG export projects, have been canceled under these Liberals because of the uncertainty, the delays, the timelines, the high costs, and the unpredictability of the business environment in Canada that the Liberals have created. So it's mind-boggling to me is that the people in Canada who want to phase out the oil and gas sector, they want to do this ostensibly to protect the environment, which is a value that all of us actually share, despite what they claim. They're doing the exact opposite of what would allow Canada to make that role, to play that role to reduce global emissions. And by pulling Canada out of the international market, by hamstringing primary oil and gas production, and on top of that making it impossible to get any major infrastructure or export infrastructure built, then they're taking Canada out of the game and ceding that market share to oil and gas producers around the world who don't come anywhere near the environmental standards that Canadian producers do. And also, of course, the difference in Canada is that oil and gas production benefits everybody. Certainly there are direct benefits to the local communities or to the local Indigenous communities and Indigenous workers and businesses operating in the sectors which are usually in rural and remote areas. But the tax revenue that comes out of that work is spread right across the country and provides programs and services for every single Canadian, every corner, and every community. Not to mention, of course, the spin-off secondary and tertiary economic impacts throughout the economies of all provinces. But the Prime Minister has always said, well, we believe the economy and the environment go hand in hand. Well, I think it's the Conservative approach that actually shows that, because the Prime Minister says that on one hand, but what he actually does is spout myths about the oil and gas sector to pit them against each other, and is calling Canada to phase out all our oil and gas workers and businesses on which hundreds of thousands of livelihoods depend, even while legitimate international experts like Worley Parsons have said in very comprehensive comparative analysis with Canada and other major oil and gas producing jurisdictions, comparable ones around the world, that Canada is second to none in terms of consultation, inclusion of science, evidence-based decision-making, inclusion of traditional knowledge, community consultation, Indigenous consultation. Canada traditionally and over is recognized as one of the best in the world. And now we are a country, because of these Liberals, where nothing can get built and nobody knows what the rules are, and it is unfair, unpredictable, or as the Alberta Court of Appeal just said, uncertain, unpredictable, unquantifiable, and another word that is escaping me at this moment. But
well, like I always
it's all the things Conservatives warned the Liberals
absolutely
would make
we've
it.
been talking about this forever. What I like to point out is that Keystone XL was canceled when Joe Biden came in, and of course prices started to spike in the United States. It's through the roof there as well.
Yes.
What did Joe Biden do when he wanted excess or more supply? He turned to OPEC nations for an increase. Meanwhile, we're right here. Did the Prime Minister pick up the phone and say, hey, President Biden, we have an abundance of supply here. Why don't we help you out because we're neighbors and friends? But it was crickets.
Totally.
Not even a try to get Keystone started again.
Yes, it was totally crickets. And I think it was actually back when you and I were working primarily on natural resources together, if I have this timeline right, that would have been the beginning of some of the legal challenges in the U.S. So what we said at the time was the Canadian government should, like on 5 Alarm 5 emergency basis right now, figure out how to provide every possible tool, legal support, and resource to help the proponent make the case within the American courts for KXL, while at the same time really escalating their diplomatic efforts, because of course there were already American politicians who were campaigning against it. Now again, they're a little bit like the noisy, impactful minority on this issue, as sometimes is the case in oil and gas producing communities in Canada where actually the majority support it, but there is a noisy minority who absolutely have the right to express their views and speak, but there are fewer. That's the same actually in terms of the legislators in the U.S. and their opinion of Keystone XL, but you have an ideological agenda there at play that has nothing to do with either American energy security, Canadian energy security, or securing North American energy supply as we ought to be.
Well, let's talk about this then. The left wants us to more reliant on electric vehicles, which is fine if the technology innovation drives us there. But at the same time, if you're going to up your demand for electric vehicles, we also have to start mining for the materials needed for the electric vehicles, and it's called rare earth for a reason. So it's bad.
And it's mostly being mined in China right now.
In China,
by children.
Yes, exactly. Or in mines bought up by China in Africa. Using children in some cases. But it's bad to take oil out of the ground. It's okay to take rare earth materials out of the ground. Forget the impact, the environmental, the impact, the footprint that it leaves. But it's also, when you talk about energy in the world, conservatives want an abundance of energy. They want choices.
Both and, not either
both.
Or.
Exactly, both. The left wants to shave off and shut down oil and gas and only have one source. You know, we have problems with recycling, all that stuff, and the battery life and all that. But when conservatives talk about energy, we want an abundance of source, because abundance equals peace. And when you have more of something, there is more for everyone. And we can be a leader in that.
Totally. And this is one of the things that always boggles my mind when, well, I guess it seems like every political party except for conservatives set this discussion up as if it is mutually exclusive or as if these things are pit against each other, because of course they aren't. Because of course in Canada, you know, in terms of clean technology or the development of alternative and renewable energies, well, first of all, the biggest funders of those things, bar none, just comparing all apples and oranges, are governments and utility companies. But then when you get into the private sector and you say, which companies are among the top private sector, and now I'm not talking about just investment conglomerates, which private companies are among the top investors in alternative energies, in renewable energies, and in clean tech? Well, it's oil sands and pipeline companies. They are, because they're multi-integrated, innovative energy companies.
And the market's demanding that.
Yes.
The market wants that.
Right. So government doesn't need to insert its, in this case, not invisible hand, and pick winners over losers and force this, what they call just transition, which actually is a code word for utter devastation of hundreds of thousands of Canadians'
but only
livelihoods and our standard of living.
We can still import it. That's okay.
Right.
Don't look behind the curtain.
You know what else always confuses me too, Jamie, exactly to your point, is so for me, like, I have no problem with the idea of moving towards these other forms of energy, but we have to be realistic how we're going to do it. And Canadians will also use those other forms of energy when they are abundant, available, affordable. And feasible in their lives.
And that was been our whole point the whole time.
But to your point about the rare earth mineral mining, you know, so knowing that right now globally, I guess what you would call maybe the feedstock for the development of these technologies is mined in other countries. And it's not just like child labor and in countries where they violate human rights and all that stuff. It's also like in some of these places, if you, for example, look at the tailings pits of mines of rare earth minerals, Jamie, it is utter environmental devastation, devastation to agricultural land, devastation to farmers for hundreds of square miles. And then, of course, there's the back end problem we know countries are already having with disposing of that hazardous waste. Well, again, the anti-energy opponents who are trying to put this up as an either or conversation, those are the very people who often you hear talking about cumulative effects of industrial development. Well, conservatives also care about cumulative effects of industrial development and ensuring that we reduce that as much as possible and uphold environmental stewardship. But how are those proponents not just totally fine with that being the real cumulative effects of forcing this transition before Canada is producing its own? And but then then as soon as you try to talk to them about the real cumulative effects of Canadian oil and gas development and how it stacks up second to none on the planet, well, they still say, we don't care. You're only going to be able to build a pipeline on this in this country if you can definitely account, if the pipeline company can definitely account for how much emissions are going to come out of tailpipes at the end user.
Yeah, right.
Like, okay.
How do you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the intersectional dynamics of whatever the heck you better be able to account for before you can even get into apply for a pipeline.
And it's great if you're a left-wing investor, right? You can invest your clients' money in countries that are producing oil and gas that don't have the kind of the green Marxists that North America seems to have, while at the same time having your clients' money put into kind of renewable, government-accepted methods of transition, if you will.
Yes.
And you win either way.
Yes.
You're a winner because you know oil and gas isn't going to go down. You've curbed the supply here at home, but you've also created a heavily subsidized market in the EV technology field that you win either way.
Yes, and there's an additional thing here that I find very, very troubling, and I think people should know about it. You remember, well, I guess it's still happening, but remember when like a lot of the big banks or the international funds were starting to make a big show about pulling out of Canada and pulling out of the oil sands in particular. Well, I don't know. I ended up meeting a person who is all tied into those circles. So he is like, you know, a bazillionaire and absolutely in the upper echelons of the elite mucky mucks. But he's originally a rural Canadian, and he cares about Canada. He wants to put Canada first. He cares about employing everyday Canadians. He cares about investing in the country. And he's involved in a whole bunch of different sectors, but he was trying to build some major infrastructure in our country. And so he hobnobs like at all these places around the world where they make these decisions, and like with the Swiss banks and all that. So I talked to him about this, and I said, you know, like, what is going on here? Is this a show or is this a real thing? And he said, oh, investors are 100% pulling out of Canada because of the uncertainty, because of the risk, because of they can't, you know, it's not a, you know, they can't assess their ROI there. They don't even have confidence that once they pass the new just total schmozzle of a regulatory process, that there's going to be any political will to allow them to actually build. Because you can look at those exact same investors who are pulling out of Canada, and whether their funds are in other countries, it's clearly not about being best in class on the environment.
Right.
And he said, however, because all these elites hobnob, and it's all about relationships, and they have all their fancy meetings.
Yeah, they'll never change their lifestyle.
Yes, and they don't actually want to admit, like, no, we're pulling our money out because the government's made a mess of Canada. They instead are going to spin that it is, you know, because of their environmental consciousness, like, and they're concerned about the environment. It's so destructive to Canada, but that is why it is so imperative that elected representatives in Canada have to commit ourselves to busting myths, to fighting back, to valuing our own sectors, and to put Canadian industries and Canadian workers first.
Absolutely, 100%. I wanted to get to the NDP motion that happened yesterday, but we are actually pretty much out of time. Unfortunately, that was a good conversation. We'll have to have you back on to talk about that. But as you know, I always give the guests the last word. You've summed it up pretty well, but if there's anything else you want to say, the floor is yours.
Well, I don't think there is anything else to say, except that when we do get a chance to talk about this motion that the Liberals or the NDP have put together. This is just their classic ideology that makes no sense. It all comes from exactly what we were talking about in this conversation. And it's wrong-headed, and it's bad for Canada. So that's why it's more important than ever for Conservatives to do our jobs and to fight for everyday working Canadians and for all Canadian sectors, but especially for our world-leading oil and gas sector, which is under attack and benefits every community in the country.
I couldn't agree more. A wealth of knowledge. That is Shannon Stubbs, a member of Parliament for Lakeland in the beautiful province of Alberta, also the Shadow Minister for Rural Economic Development. She is doing a great job, and unfortunately, she has so much knowledge we ran out of time, so we'll have to bring her back to talk further about this. We do appreciate your time as well. Remember, new content every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Please like, comment, subscribe, share this program. Together we can push back against that ever-moving Liberal agenda. It's also on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. Download it, listen to it at your convenience. As always, remember, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's the blueprint.